favorable, if market, interest rate, timing, et cetera, remains favorable, which we anticipate, we would also look to refund or refinance two bond issues, or 2013 and 2014 bond series. So when we issue our bonds, we put a 10-year call date on all of those. They may be a 23 or 24-year period of bonds, which we ladder throughout, but in investor purchasing, we'll have a 10-year committed period where when they purchase our bonds, they will receive interest and principal through that period. But at the call date, at that 10-year period, we have the option, the agency, to refinance those bonds, go back to the market, sell at a lower rate, and pay off any remaining from years 11 through 23 or 24, whatever that would have been, pay the remaining off. And basically, we've done that in the past, and we, over the last 4 years, we've saved, approximately $80 million over time by being able to do that. And that comes in the basis of interest rate savings.
Thank you.
So is the $400,000 a flat fee that we're offering, or that's just up to that and they bid the cost of providing the service? What's the variable?
The latter. So typically the bond counsel and financial advisor will be on a per bond basis. So if, for example, if we only sold we'll sell typically $150 million of bonds to fund student loans on an annual basis. But if for some reason our cash flow was robust and we sold $100 million, then our fee would be lower because it's on a per bond basis. But that is a limit. So we would have up to $400,000 in the solicitation, and then it's going to be dependent on the actual bids that we receive, as well as the
So is there a minimum kind of holding, cost? I mean, so let's say we sold no bonds.
We would not pay a dime.
Okay, thank you.
Now, if we sold $50 million of bonds, there may be a minimum threshold, depending on their bid, to say, how much level of work they have to put into it. So they may have a minimum threshold on theirs, and then have a per bond or this minimum threshold. We have not ever incurred the minimum threshold, because usually we're $100 million to $150 million annual on our sale.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, if not, do I have a motion to adopt the recommendation to issue a solicitation for selection of a vendor to serve as financial advisor for the agency's student loan program?
So moved.
Do we have a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Agenda item 7A is discussion of the State of Texas federal portion of the statewide single audit for the fiscal year ended August 31st, 2021. Report number 22-320, issued March 22 by the State Auditor's Office. This item does not require any action. Bhakti Patel, partner at Clifton Larson Allen, will present this item and is available for questions.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. The statewide single audit, thank you, for the state of Texas. Clifton Larson Allen performed the single audit for fiscal 21 for the state of Texas. I'm here to present to you the coordinating board's results as part of that audit. During our audit, we identified one program to audit in fiscal 21. That was the Education Stabilization Fund, more specifically the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or GEAR, as most of us know it as. We noted that the coordinating board spent a little over $37 million of that funding in fiscal 21, so it was selected as a program to audit. We did test those compliance requirements that we identified were directed material to the program, and also as part of our testing, we look at internal controls over compliance. We did have two findings this year as part of that audit that I will summarize. The full finding language is in your board packet, but I will summarize those here for you today. The first finding was finding 2021-014. This was a significant deficiency in internal control over compliance. As part of the GEAR funding, there are progress reports that are submitted to the granting agency. We looked at 12 progress reports. We identified that 9 of those supporting documentation wasn't maintained for those. And then we also identified that the same individuals preparing and reviewing and submitting those reports. So we did have a recommendation to segregate those duties and to maintain that supporting documentation as part of to maintain an audit trail. We didn't identify any incorrect reporting or any question costs as part of that, but again, just an internal reporting matter. Finding 2021-015 was also a significant deficiency in internal control over compliance and non-compliance. We looked at 17 subaward agreements. This is monies passed through to other entities, and 7 of those agreements were missing required information on those agreements, which was the federal award date and the identification number, which are required to be included on those agreements for those pass-through agreements. So again, we didn't identify any question costs here, but since they are required elements of those agreements, that was an issue of non-compliance as well as the internal control matter that we identified. As part of our reporting requirements, we do obtain management's response for these findings. So we did discuss these with management at the end of the audit. And management's response indicated that corrective action has been taken over these findings. We don't audit those corrective action plans as part of the fiscal 21 single audit. However, as we commence the fiscal 22 single audit, we will follow up on those findings, do some limited testing to verify that those corrective action plans have been put in place. So that will begin about May or June when we start our fiscal 22 single audit. With that, I am happy to answer any questions anyone has.
So the management has answered that the gear funds, the finding relating to gear funds has been modified and corrected?
Correct. As part of the response, they did say corrective action has been put in place.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Patel. Agenda item 7B is discussion of the statements on auditing standards number 114, the auditor's communication with those charged with governance. This item does not require any action. Susan Warren, audit partner with KPMG, will present this item to the committee and be available for questions. Ms. Warren.
Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members, Commissioner. Shannon and I are here today to present the audit plan for the August 31st, 21 financial statement audit. And so, I'm sorry, do I have a clicker? Okay, next slide. So the first just here is just our reminder to our board members of the exceptional client experience we try to create for you. And as always, if you have any feedback, we are welcome to take that. We do not realize it's a client service business. So the next slide is a service team. Shannon and I are both on the next slide there. The takeaway on this slide is these names should all be the same ones you saw last year. So what that means is our management side of the team has come back to serve the coordinating board. And in our business, that's a wonderful thing to have a returning team, and also to your team as well, because you don't have to explain everything to us so much. So it is nice to have a returning team. The following slide is we do try to give you KPMG's diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, basically there for your reference and information, and just our chair and DEI officer as well, just as more information for you. We like to try to line up our goals and values with our clients. Getting into the required communication. The next slide will show you kind of the agenda, if you will. We are here to talk about the August 31st, 21 financial statement audit. What that middle couple of paragraphs tells you is it's a financial statement audit. We do look at internal controls over financial reporting, but we don't issue a control opinion like you would expect in an SEC or PCOB environment. That is not required in an AICPA audit. So those are what those 2 paragraphs are telling you there. The rest of it just kind of tells you what's to come. So if we go to the next slide here, materiality. I know you probably have heard this conversation before, but we are required to remind the committee each year of what materiality is and what it is not. So materiality is basically there is a qualitative and a quantitative factor to it. So there are some magic numbers, as my clients like to say, that we calculate off your financial statements, and those are what I call do not pass go. So if we have a adjustment or a difference above those numbers, we have to come to a resolution because we've decided that it would materially mistake the financial statements to issue it without a formal resolution. There are other magic numbers underneath that where we can work to pass and agree that it's a timing issue, it's not cost beneficial to book, et cetera, et cetera. But materiality drives kind of the nature of the business in those conversations, and the bottom piece there tells you that it also drives the amount of test work we do. So said another way, the lower the materiality, the bigger the threshold, or I'm sorry, the bigger sample sizes are, because we have to do more work to be able to issue our opinion. So the amount of materiality does make a difference in the extent of test work that is performed. Moving to the next slide is our timeline. So we have started back in January having conversations with management about the audit, asking for request lists. Most of the IT work is done also before now. In fact, it actually finished last week. So I can tell you at this point, there's nothing to report on IT. It's a clean audit from an IT perspective. We are in the middle of the financial statement audit, including the final risk assessment, which is part of today's meeting, and then actually starting our test work and doing our sampling. That'll go all the way through May, and then we will issue in May and come back at the July AOC meeting and present those results. If for some reason something doesn't end the way we all like it to be, there would be communications with the chair and vice chair through the commissioner and myself, Mark, Ken, a bunch of us, if you will, before that meeting were to occur. So basically, if you don't hear from us, all is good, and we'll see you in July, is what this timeline will tell you. From a risk assessment perspective on the next slide, there are things that we do like to remind everybody that are always risk in a financial statement environment. The first one is management override controls, and I realize those are some scary four little words, but they can occur. Management is in a position to always override controls. That's just reality. So the auditing standards do require that we take a look at that, be diligent about looking at the controls that surround that. What has coordinating board done to minimize that potential impact? And so we do look at that during our audit. There are also an estimate, which I'm sure you're aware of. I heard Ken just talking about it. Your loans obviously have an allowance for doubtful accounts. That is a significant estimate that we look at that process and that methodology to make sure those net values, if you will, and the financials are reasonable. And then, of course, the IT systems. A lot of reliance on the processing in those IT systems, the controls, the access, things like that, which I just mentioned. So that is a significant element of the audit as well. On the next slide is just some other audit areas, not necessarily significant risk, but significant audit areas, the distinguish between the two for us. So student loans is on the first one, and we do look at the balances, the interest accruals, the revenue coming off of those loans. We look at how those transactions are posted to the right student accounts as they come through the lockbox receipt system. So all that part is all part of the student loan process. The second one is debt. As you heard today, you do issue debt almost every year to basically back those student loans. And so we do look at that, the debt, you're making your payments correctly, debt covenants, just making sure there's nothing there that would cause those bonds to be called early. Financial assistance expenses. So as you well know, you get appropriations to push out to the colleges and the universities. We do look to make sure that those are properly documented with grant agreements. The timing of those is correct. They've been approved, and those have been pushed out accordingly. And the last one is obviously the revenue, and that will include gear this year as well. So that revenue being recognized and appropriately spent in the financial statements. This is a reminder of fraud risk. I mean, just like management override, fraud can occur in any environment. None of us like to think of that, and we like to think that it's not going to, but it can, unfortunately. So what this does tell you is that we do have a responsibility to look for fraud factors when we're doing our audit and our one-on-one interviews, looking at controls. You know, if something wasn't signed, okay, well, that might be okay, but is there something more to it, right? Is it pervasive? Is there an issue behind it? That type of thing. So fraud is something we're constantly aware of and looking for. It does go into our risk assessment procedures and part of our planned audit approach. We do have an actuary involved in our team. As you may or may not know, you have an allocation from the state for your pension and your OPEB for the employees of the coordinating board. And so that allocation is an actuarial estimate. And so we actually do have an actuary look at that to make sure that allocation looks reasonable compared to just the coordinating board standalone financial statements. Independence, I just need to remind everybody that we are independent. We obviously cannot sign an opinion if we're not, but this is just a slide that lets you know that we do have a system of quality controls in place to monitor that, of which I'm a big piece of that puzzle. So if somebody wants to do work for the coordinating board, that comes through our quality control system and has to be approved by me since I am the audit partner. So that keeps us from stumbling over each other, if you will, to a certain extent, if you think about consulting, tax, audit, all those types of services together. So this is the kind of the responsibilities. I like to think of this as what have you hired us to do slide. So in the middle there, you have basically hired us to look at providing timely feedback to you, the responsibilities, and ultimately on the far right, it says we will form and express an opinion on your financial statements that your management team has put together. Everything else in between on this slide are all the things that I have to tell you if they happen during an audit, and if you start reading the words, a lot of them are bad things, so I just kind of let you read those words yourself. Try to make it a little fun. This can be a little dry. So inquiries. So this is the part where I have to ask some questions, and I do need some feedback from the board, or committee, apologies, so that basically you can be a part of the risk assessment process. These are standard questions. We do ask them every year. It is required that I do that, so please bear with me. I will try to lead with what you have told me in the past, and then just let you affirm whether that is still correct or not. All right. So question 1. Is anybody aware of any violations or laws or regulations that I would need to take up and talk to Nicole or outside counsel regarding? Nope. Thank you.
No.
Okay. Any significant communicators with regulators? So that could be a variety of people. It could be the bond. It could be Department of Ed. Any type of matter like that where an external governmental party has been brought to your attention?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay. Any concerns with financial reporting? So basically the reports that Ken makes and the meetings that y'all are on when you're looking at the numbers and the budgets and the spending. Any concerns about the numbers or changes and such?
Not that we're concerned of.
Okay.
Or concerned of. Anybody else can chime in, but I'll represent the groups. if
Understood.
that's okay.
Well, I see people shaking their heads, so I
Yeah,
think people are
I'm
chiming
looking
in.
at that as well.
Okay. In the middle of the page, we do need to ask if anybody is aware of any allegations or suspected fraud of a coordinating board employee.
Not aware.
Not that's been brought to our attention, no.
Thank you. And just so you know, I think most of you do, but we do have one-on-ones with your entire executive committee as well, and we ask these same questions of them. So I feel like by the time we finish those meetings, we would have a pretty good indication if anyone in the agency was aware. All right, the additional inquiries at the bottom, we kind of already covered number 1, so I'll skip to number 2. So appropriate person. What this means is if Ken, Mark, and the commissioner and I decide that there needs to be something brought to the board before the July meeting, we like to have a protocol in place for which that might occur. No surprises, just knowing how to do that. There's 2 ways that could be done. We could actually just call the chair and brief the chair and then let the chair decide whether they wanted to call a special meeting or that type of thing, or we could just go straight to a special meeting. In the past, you've asked us to call the chair and let the chair make that decision. I just want to make sure that's still the appropriate protocol.
I will leave it to the rest of the board since I'm the chair. Are you all okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. From an allocation of responsibilities, which is question 3, what we're looking for there is, actually I just heard one where if you've changed significantly, like what needs to be brought to you for approval, if you changed, what you've allowed the commissioner to make decisions for versus the board, then that does factor into internal controls and how we would audit that, if you will. And I know I just heard Nicole present one, so I'll take that. I did take that down as a note. But any other significant changes like that you can remember approving?
I think we temporarily changed the approval limits during COVID.
Yeah, I think we have made some changes, but similar to limits in terms of because of the COVID and because of the gear funds that we've had to adjust a little bit of that, but similar to what Nicole just presented.
And I do meet with Nicole, so I will get a full list of those. All right, and that just helps us set our thresholds, because when we pick transactions, we do make sure that they've been properly approved by the appropriate individuals, and so knowing those thresholds helps us with that. 4, objectives and strategies. I know that gear is in this one, so I'll just preface with the fact that obviously gear is a big change in strategies and objectives. But outside of that, and I should also say, I know you're looking for a new loan system. Two big things there, right? Anything else that you can think of that would be a significant potential change in operations?
I think just in general, IT advancements and data modernization, all that is constant change.
Data modernization, I should have added that to my list. Yes, thank you. 5 is kind of a catch-all, but anything that the committee, particular thing that you wanted to bring up that you think warrants potential, us looking at as your external auditor, concerns you might have. It could be controls, it could be gear, it could be something that just, might keep you up at night.
Everything that you say we need to be doing, we want to make sure that you make sure we're doing.
Duly noted. Thank you. Fair enough. I asked for that. Okay. 6 is about internal controls. So any concerns with the controls, which here significantly is the IT system, right? But you still do have manual oversight, manual reconciliations, things like that. Any concerns about any of the controls that the coordinating board has in place? I'm mainly more concerned about they're not working. Any to your knowledge, anybody know of anything that's not working?
I think constantly is access control.
Yes, ma'am. That's absolutely true. 7 doesn't really apply. 8, I'm not aware of any unusual transactions. That's going to be, can't even think of one that would apply to you, to be honest. Just
Everything during COVID, right? Was
everything during
unusual.
COVID. That would probably be about right. So, although I think that's become almost norm now.
Yeah.
So, and then the last one is any violations that you're aware of, any laws or regulations. I mean, I just listened to Nicole present all those wonderful things about ethics and procurement and all that type of stuff. But any knowledge of any violations of any such laws or regulations?
Not that we're aware of.
All right.
Nope.
That is our official required communication. Any other questions I can answer for you?
I don't think so. Thank you so much, Ms.
Thank you
Warren.
for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 7C, it's the auditor's update on internal audit reports and activities, including data modernization initiative and gear fund review and advise. This item does not require any action. Mr. Mark Pale, Assistant Commissioner, Internal Audit and Compliance, and Mr. Paul Mayert, Assistant Director, Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item and are available to answer questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Pleasure to be with you. We completed 2 engagements since our prior meeting in January, and those reports are both in your materials. I'd like to talk briefly about these 2 projects because they address significant agency initiatives that you've heard some discussion on today. You just heard the external auditors talking about gear funds. You've heard Ken Martin and others mention the federal initiatives that are underway. So we had Gear Funds Administration, and then also the Data Modernization Initiative is the second major area that we took a look at. So this is a slightly different internal audit approach, different tool in the kit. It's one where we're looking at consulting on large-scale initiatives as they're in progress to provide timely advice to the leadership team on what we see working, and also be able to recommend improvements to address risks as these things are underway. So the reports look different than the traditional reports that you see coming from our area. This serves to distinguish them as consulting engagements. It allows us to provide timely feedback to management while these things are underway. It also allows for course correction while there's still time for those actions or recommendations to be implemented and result in improved outcomes. For example, on the GEAR federal funds interim status report, so that's one of the 2 that you have in your materials, we made a recommendation to better organize and label key documents needed to demonstrate compliance with federal requirements. Requirements like you just heard Ms. Bhakti Patel covering in her single audit update. We also pointed out the administrative challenges associated with the decentralized approach to managing over 24 federal gear projects, and the commissioner and his team have responded with additional resources that are dedicated to this effort. On the data modernization front, we focused on the critical aspects of information security for this initiative, and we're working closely with Lori Fye and Jinjin Sun and their teams for this important project. Here we recommended and management agreed that a centralized repository of DMI and other cloud products and services would be an important way to manage these resources, to have a single source of information about security configurations and responsibilities of the coordinating board as well as our cloud vendors. So to conclude, the interim status reports in your materials are an important tool to provide this timely feedback. We look forward to ongoing collaboration with the Commissioner and his team, and we'll keep the board apprised of our results in future reports. If there are no questions on those two documents, I would just also like to conclude by updating the board on the status of our external quality assurance review. You might recall I mentioned that we're due to have one of these performed once every 3 years. So we went through a competitive solicitation and have selected a highly experienced consultant to perform this work. His name is Mr. Richard Tarr. You will be hearing more. I will certainly prep you for the discussion, but he'll be reaching out to certain members of the board. He'll be working with management and others to conduct interviews, and they'll be taking a look at our audit operation, our documentation, and providing recommendations to help improve our operations. And all of that will happen, start soon. It'll really pick up steam in the summer. He'll have a report for our review by the end of August, and then that report he will deliver in a virtual presentation to the committee at the October meeting. So that is something that's on the horizon. And that concludes my update on internal audit activities. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to the next agenda item. Agenda items 8A1 through 11 are the auditor's updates on state and federal compliance monitoring and reports and activities. These items do not require any action. Mr. Mark Pale, Assistant Commissioner, Internal Audit and Compliance, and Mr. Paul Mayert, Assistant Director, Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item and are available to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Mayor to address the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Today's update will be a brief update for state compliance monitoring and for federal compliance monitoring. For state compliance monitoring, we completed 11 state compliance monitoring projects since our prior AOSA meeting in January. The first 5 projects relate to formula funding. Of these reports, one report for the project at Ranger College includes an observation related to information security controls. The institution has initiated corrective action for that particular observation. And then the last 6 projects relate to sexual misconduct reporting. The first reports were included in the materials for this agenda item. In the last 3 reports were covered in the cause meeting earlier today. None of the first 3 reports in the materials included any observations. And with that, we'll move to a short update with regard to federal compliance monitoring. As you may recall, this function provides assistance to program areas in monitoring recipients of funds that the coordinating board has passed through to them. For example, a lot of the GEAR funds we pass through to other entities. First, with regard to Perkins Funding, another federal program that's been long-standing, we completed both the FY19 and FY20 Perkins projects with 15 reviews for FY19 and for 20 reviews for FY20. None of the reviews included observations. That program has been ongoing for some time, and we've been able to work through a lot of corrective action on those types of projects. Second, with regard to FY21 federal GEAR funding, we continue to participate in GEAR meetings and training, as well as discussing subrecipient risk assessments, monitoring plans with GEAR project leaders. In addition, in conjunction with GEAR program leaders, we have started our subrecipient review work in the areas of Texas reskilling support, true institutional capacity grants, and student financial aid program, project programs. Lastly, we also are continuing our review of subrecipient FY21 single audit reports for entities that the courting board has passed federal funds through to these subrecipients. And that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Do we have any questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Pale and Mr. Mayor. Hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the last item, which is adjournment. This concludes the Agency Operations Committee meeting. The time is 2:12 p.m. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
In a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you all.